My name is Emma. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I went from being called just a waitress by my own father to proving him and everyone else completely wrong. You know that feeling when someone you love looks at you like you're not good enough? Like your dreams don't matter? That was my reality for years, until one day everything changed in the most unexpected way. The same people who laughed at me, who dismissed me, who treated me like I was invisible, suddenly couldn't ignore what I had become. What happened next will shock you, and trust me, you won't see this coming. If you've ever felt underestimated or dismissed by someone who should have believed in you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like because I know you'll relate to every word I'm about to share. Have you ever had someone close to you make you feel small? Let me know in the comments, because today I'm sharing how I turned that pain into my greatest victory. Picture this: family dinner, my father's friends over, everyone talking about their successful careers while I'm serving them coffee. My dad, Robert, looks at his friend Mike and says, "Well, at least your daughter became a lawyer. Mine? She's just a waitress." The room went quiet, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment as they all turned to look at me. That moment, that exact moment, is when something inside me snapped, though I didn't realize it yet. I had been working double shifts at Tony's Diner for 3 years, saving every penny I could while living in a tiny studio apartment. My father never understood why I chose this path, instead of following his dream for me to become an accountant like him. He saw my uniform as a symbol of failure, my tip jar as evidence of a wasted life. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been quietly building something extraordinary on the side. You see, every night after my shift, I would come home exhausted but determined, working on something that would change everything. The irony was about to hit them harder than they could ever imagine, and the very thing my father mocked would become the reason the whole world would know my name. But that revelation was still months away. And first, I had to survive the daily humiliation of being treated like I didn't matter. Growing up in the Henderson household meant one thing: success was measured by your paycheck and your job title. Nothing else mattered. My father, Robert, had built his accounting firm from scratch and expected his only daughter to follow a respectable career path. Every conversation we had somehow circled back to my poor life choices and how embarrassed he was to tell his colleagues what I did for a living. The weight of his disappointment pressed down on me every single day, making me question if maybe he was right about me. But deep down, something rebellious inside me refused to give up on my own vision of what success could look like. I want you to subscribe and hit that like button if you've ever had a parent or someone important make you feel like your dreams weren't good enough. How many of you have been told you're settling for less when you're actually following your heart? Drop a comment and let me know, because this story is for everyone who's ever been underestimated. The truth is, I didn't choose to be a waitress because I lacked ambition or intelligence. I chose it because it gave me the flexibility to pursue something I was passionate about, something that consumed my thoughts and dreams every waking moment. While my father saw a girl in an apron taking orders, I saw myself as someone gathering stories, understanding people, and learning about human nature in ways that no corporate job ever could. Every customer who sat at my tables became a character in the bigger story I was writing in my mind. My mother, Linda, tried to play peacemaker between us, but even she would sometimes sigh and say, "Emma, honey, don't you want more for yourself?" They couldn't understand that I already had more. I had purpose, I had a plan, and I had a burning determination to prove that success doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Their definition of making it felt like a prison to me, while my supposed dead-end job felt like freedom. The family gatherings became a nightmare, with relatives asking about my career plans in that pitying tone that made my skin crawl. Uncle Tom would pat my shoulder and say, "It's never too late to go back to school, sweetheart," while my cousin Jessica, the successful marketing executive, would give me that sympathetic smile that said, "Poor Emma, she just doesn't get it." Yeah. But what they didn't get was that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I needed to do, building towards something none of them could have imagined. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding my relationship with my father is key to understanding why his words cut so deep. Robert Henderson was the kind of man who believed that hard work and traditional success were the only paths worth taking in life. He had grown up poor, worked his way through college, and built his accounting firm with nothing but determination and countless sleepless nights. In his mind, he had given me every opportunity he never had, and watching me throw it all away to serve coffee felt like a personal betrayal. Every time he looked at me in that uniform, I could see the disappointment in his eyes, and it broke something inside me each time. I remember being 8 years old, sitting at his desk while he worked late into the night, and he'd tell me, "Emma, one day you'll have an office just like this. Maybe even bigger." He had already mapped out my entire life: good grades, business school, a corner office, and respect from everyone who knew my name. When I was 16 and told him I wanted to study creative writing, he actually laughed and said, "That's a nice hobby, sweetheart, but let's talk about real careers." The message was clear. My dreams weren't practical, my passions weren't valuable, and my vision of success was just childish fantasy. The worst part wasn't even the disappointment. It was the way he'd introduce me to his colleagues. "This is my daughter, Emma," he'd say with a forced smile, and then quickly change the subject before anyone could ask what I did for work. At his office Christmas parties, I'd watch him beam with pride as he talked about other people's children. Mike's son just made partner at his law firm, or Janet's daughter is a surgeon now. But when it came to me, there was only uncomfortable silence and a quick redirect to safer topics. I spent years trying to earn back his approval, even enrolling in business classes at the local community college for a semester. But every time I sat in those classrooms talking about profit margins and corporate strategies, I felt like I was suffocating. My heart wasn't in it, and my father could sense it too, which only made his frustration grow stronger. He'd say things like, "You have so much potential, Emma, if you just apply yourself to something meaningful," not realizing that his definition of meaningful was slowly killing my spirit. The breaking point came during my college graduation when I told him I was taking the waitressing job instead of the entry-level accounting position he'd arranged for me at his firm. The look on his face was like I had physically struck him, and he said the words that would haunt me for years. "I don't understand where I went wrong with you." That night, I realized that no matter what I achieved in life, it would never be enough for him unless it fit into his narrow definition of success. But what he didn't know was that his rejection would become the fuel for something extraordinary. Working as a waitress taught me more about life, people, and success than any business degree ever could have. But try explaining that to a society that judges worth by job titles. Every day I put on that uniform, I knew I was walking into a world that saw me as less than, someone who couldn't do better, someone who had settled, someone who wasn't smart enough for a real career. The customers who snapped their fingers at me, the family members who spoke about my job in whispers, and the strangers who asked what I really wanted to do, as if serving people couldn't possibly be a choice. They all fed into the same narrative. But here's what I want you to understand. If you've ever felt judged for your choices, or made to feel small because of how you make a living, smash that subscribe button and hit like because this story is about to show you something incredible. If you've ever been looked down on because of your job, or if someone has ever made you feel like you're not living up to your potential, leave a comment below and let me know your story. I'm willing to bet that many of you have talents and dreams that people can't see just by looking at your paycheck. Am I right? The stigma around being a waitress runs deeper than most people realize, and it starts with this toxic idea that serving others is somehow beneath us. I'd watch business executives treat me like I was invisible, talking over me, around me, and about me as if I couldn't understand their important conversations. My own father's friends would give me that patronizing smile and ask, "So, Emma, when are you going to get a real job?" As if the work I was doing, feeding people, making their days brighter, managing multiple tables while staying calm under pressure, wasn't real enough for them. What hurt the most was how even people who claimed to care about me bought into these stereotypes. My high school friends would meet up and talk about their promotions, their office politics, their business trips, while I sat there feeling like I had nothing valuable to contribute to the conversation. They'd ask about my plans with that concerned tone that suggested they were worried about me, when really they were just relieved they weren't in my position. The assumption was always that I was stuck, that I was settling, that I was afraid to reach for something better. But here's the truth they couldn't see. Every shift at Tony's Diner was teaching me things about human nature, resilience, and authentic connection that no corporate training program could have provided. I learned how to read people in seconds, how to diffuse tense situations with a smile, how to work efficiently under pressure, and how to find joy in making someone's day a little bit better. I was building skills that would prove invaluable later on, even though nobody, including myself at times, recognized their worth. The irony was that while everyone pitied me for just being a waitress, I was actually living a richer, more authentic life than many of the people who looked down on me. I knew the regular customers' names, their stories, their struggles, and their victories, while the executives in their fancy suits couldn't even remember their own assistants' birthdays. But society had trained us all to value the wrong things, and it would take something extraordinary to open everyone's eyes to what real success actually looks like. That moment was coming, though none of us knew it yet. The mockery reached its peak during my cousin Jessica's engagement party, an event that would forever be burned into my memory as the moment I realized just how little my own family thought of me. Picture this: a fancy restaurant, everyone dressed to impress, talking about career achievements and life milestones, while I showed up straight from my evening shift, still smelling faintly of the diner's kitchen. My father saw me walk in, and I watched his face change, not with joy at seeing his daughter, but with embarrassment that I was there representing his family. The worst part wasn't even what he said to me, but what I overheard him saying to others. And if you've ever had someone you love talk about you like you were their biggest disappointment, hit subscribe and like this video because you'll understand exactly how I felt. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone was judging you before you even opened your mouth? Comment below if you've experienced that kind of humiliation from people who were supposed to support you, because what happened next changed everything. I was standing near the bar trying to blend into the background when I heard my father talking to my Aunt Margaret and Uncle Tom. "I just don't know what to do with Emma anymore," he said, shaking his head like I was some unsolvable problem. 28 years old and still playing waitress like it's some kind of career. He actually used air quotes when he said career, and the three of them laughed like my life was some kind of joke. My aunt chimed in with, "Well, at least she's working, I suppose, though I can't imagine what she tells people when they ask what she does for a living." The conversation got worse from there, with Uncle Tom suggesting that maybe I had learning difficulties they hadn't noticed when I was younger, and my father agreeing that there must be something wrong with me to be so content with such a simple life. They talked about me like I wasn't even a real person with feelings, dreams, and ambitions of my own. "The thing is," my father continued, "I've given her every opportunity, paid for the best schools, and she throws it all away to serve coffee to truckers." The casual cruelty in his voice was like a knife to my heart. What they didn't know was that their failure of a daughter had been working on something extraordinary every night after those diner shifts. While they slept peacefully in their suburban homes, secure in their superiority, I was building something that would soon make all their achievements look small in comparison. But that night, standing there listening to them tear apart my life choices, I made a promise to myself that would change everything. I would prove them wrong in a way so spectacular, so undeniable, that they would never be able to look at me the same way again. The final blow came when Jessica herself approached me later that evening and with her fake concerned voice said, "Emma, honey, I know someone who manages a nice office building downtown. Maybe I could get you a job as a receptionist." She said it like she was offering me the opportunity of a lifetime, like moving from serving food to answering phones was some kind of massive upgrade. I smiled politely and thanked her, but inside I was burning with a determination that none of them could have imagined. Their pity was about to become their shock, and their mockery was about to turn into something they never saw coming. 3 months after Jessica's engagement party, everything changed on a Tuesday morning that started like any other ordinary day at Tony's diner. I was working the breakfast shift, serving coffee to the usual mix of construction workers, office employees grabbing quick bites, and elderly regulars who came in for the company as much as the food. What I didn't know was that this particular Tuesday would be the day that transformed me from just a waitress in everyone's eyes to someone they couldn't ignore, someone whose story would spread far beyond our small town. The irony was that the very skills my father had dismissed as worthless, my ability to connect with people, to listen to their stories, to make them feel heard, were about to become the foundation of something incredible. If you're someone who's ever felt invisible or overlooked, make sure you subscribe and hit that like button, because this next part is going to show you that sometimes your biggest strengths are hiding in plain sight. Has there ever been a moment when you realized you had talents people couldn't see? Let me know in the comments, because I'm about to share how everything I thought was ordinary about my life turned out to be extraordinary. It was around 9 a.m. when a woman in her 60s sat down at table 7, and something about her seemed different from my usual customers. Her name was Dorothy, and she had this quiet sadness in her eyes that reminded me of my grandmother before she passed away. As I poured her coffee, she mentioned that she was traveling through town to visit her son's grave. He had been a soldier who died overseas, and she made this trip every year on the anniversary of his death. Most people would have just nodded politely and moved on, but something in her voice made me sit down across from her and really listen. Dorothy began telling me about her son Marcus, how proud she was of his service, how much she missed their phone calls, and how empty her house felt without his laughter filling the rooms. As she talked, I found myself sharing stories of my own struggles, my relationship with my father, and how sometimes the people who love us the most can make us feel the smallest. We talked for over an hour, with me checking on my other tables in between, and by the time she was ready to leave, Dorothy had tears in her eyes, but they were different tears, healing tears. What happened next would change my life forever, though I didn't realize it at the time. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, telling me she was a producer for a national television show about everyday heroes, people who make a difference in others' lives without seeking recognition or reward. She said that in 30 years of television, she had rarely met someone with such genuine compassion and natural ability to heal others through simple human connection. "Emma," she said, looking me straight in the eyes, Would you be interested in being featured on our show? I think the world needs to hear your story. At that moment, everything my father had mocked, everything society had dismissed, was about to become my greatest triumph. The television episode featuring my story aired on a Thursday evening in March, and within hours, my entire world had flipped upside down in ways I never could have imagined. The show, called Hidden Heroes, highlighted how I had been using my position at Tony's Diner to connect with people going through difficult times, offering them genuine compassion and turning brief encounters into moments of healing. What the producers had discovered during their research was that dozens of customers had written letters to the diner over the years, crediting our conversations with helping them through divorces, job losses, grief, and depression. If you've ever wondered whether your small acts of kindness actually matter, please subscribe and hit like on this video because I'm about to show you just how powerful being genuinely human can be. Have you ever made a difference in someone's life without even realizing it? Drop a comment and tell me about a time when someone's kindness changed your day, because these stories matter more than we know. The morning after the show aired, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop with notifications, missed calls, and text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. My story had been shared thousands of times across social media, with people calling me an angel in an apron and praising the way I had turned a service job into a form of ministry. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same work my father had mocked for years was now being celebrated on national television as something beautiful and meaningful. Local news stations wanted interviews, newspapers wanted to feature my story, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the waitress who was changing lives one conversation at a time. Tony, my boss at the diner, was overwhelmed by the response as customers started driving from neighboring towns just to meet me and experience what they'd seen on television. The phone rang constantly with interview requests, and I had to learn quickly how to handle media attention while still showing up for my regular shifts. What struck me most was how many people reached out to share their own stories of feeling dismissed or undervalued in jobs that others considered beneath them. Teachers, nurses, retail workers, janitors, all suddenly feeling seen and validated by my experience. The transformation wasn't just external. Something had shifted inside me too, like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't ashamed of my uniform or apologetic about my career choice. Instead, I felt proud, validated, and deeply grateful for every moment that had led me to this point. The customers who had shared their stories with me, the late nights spent truly listening to people's pain and joy, the genuine connections I'd built, it had all been preparing me for this moment of recognition. But here's where things get really interesting. My family hadn't reached out to me at all since the show aired, and their silence spoke volumes about how unprepared they were for their disappointment to become their pride. The phone calls that should have come from my father, the congratulations that should have poured in from relatives who had spent years pitying me, were nowhere to be found. Instead, I was hearing from strangers who understood the value of my work better than my own family ever had. And that realization was about to set the stage for the most satisfying confrontation of my life. Sitting in my tiny studio apartment that night, surrounded by flowers and cards from viewers across the country, I had what I can only describe as an awakening about what success really means. For 28 years, I had been measuring my worth against my father's narrow definition of achievement: salary, title, prestige, respectability. But the response to my television appearance showed me that real impact comes from something much deeper. These strangers weren't writing to me because I had a corner office or a fancy degree. They were reaching out because I had made them feel valued, heard, and less alone in their struggles. The shift in perspective was so profound that it felt like seeing the world in color for the first time after years of black and white. One letter particularly stood out to me, written by a woman named Carol from Ohio, who said that our brief conversation during her stop at the diner 6 months earlier had literally saved her life. She had been driving cross-country after her husband's death, planning to end her journey at the Grand Canyon in the most permanent way possible. But our talk about finding purpose in pain had changed her mind completely. Carol was now volunteering at a grief counseling center, helping other widows navigate their darkest moments. And she credited our interaction with showing her that healing comes through connection, not isolation. Reading her words, I realized that while my father built financial security, I had been building something far more valuable: hope. The flood of similar stories continued for days, each one reinforcing a truth that society often overlooks. The jobs that require genuine human connection, empathy, and emotional intelligence are actually some of the most important work being done in the world. Teachers shaping young minds, nurses caring for the sick, waitresses feeding both bodies and souls. These aren't lesser careers. They're the foundation of a compassionate society. My father's world of spreadsheets and profit margins suddenly seemed small in comparison to the web of human connection I had been weaving, one conversation at a time. What amazed me most was how my story had resonated with people in all kinds of service positions who had been made to feel ashamed of their work. A school janitor wrote to tell me he'd been inspired to see his job as maintaining a safe space for children's education rather than just cleaning floors. A grocery store clerk shared how she started viewing her role as helping families provide for themselves rather than just scanning barcodes. The ripple effect was incredible. People were beginning to see the dignity and value in work that had been dismissed by a society obsessed with status and prestige. As I read through hundreds of messages that night, I realized that my father's definition of success had been not just wrong, but actively harmful to both of us. He had spent so many years focused on external validation and societal approval that he had missed the profound impact his own daughter was having on the world around her. Success wasn't about impressing people at dinner parties or having a prestigious job title to drop in conversations. It was about making a positive difference in people's lives, no matter how small those moments might seem at the time. And I was about to get the chance to share this revelation with the person who needed to hear it most. 5 days after the show aired, my father finally called, and I'll never forget the awkwardness in his voice as he struggled to find the right words. "Emma, I saw you on television," he said with a tone I had never heard from him before. Uncertain, almost vulnerable, like he was speaking to a stranger rather than his own daughter. There was a long pause before he continued. "I had no idea that people thought so highly of what you do." The admission seemed to physically hurt him, as if acknowledging the value in my work meant admitting he had been wrong about me for years. I could hear him struggling between his old beliefs and this new reality where his disappointment had become someone others admired. The conversation was painfully stilted, with my father trying to take some credit for my success, while simultaneously downplaying how harshly he had judged my choices. "Well, I always said you were good with people," he claimed, though we both knew that wasn't true. He had never once acknowledged this strength in me. He kept referring to my television appearance as if it were a fluke, a lucky accident rather than the natural result of years of genuine caring and emotional intelligence. "It's nice that they featured you," he said, as if the producers had done me some kind of charity rather than recognizing something genuinely remarkable. What struck me most was how uncomfortable he seemed with the attention I was receiving, especially when his own friends and colleagues started asking him about his famous daughter. For decades, he had been the successful one in our family, the person others looked up to and respected, and now suddenly I was getting recognition he had never achieved. The local newspaper wanted to interview him about raising such a compassionate daughter, but instead of pride, I could hear resentment in his voice as he described these requests as awkward and unnecessary attention. During that first phone call, he made several attempts to steer the conversation toward what comes next, and whether I was planning to leverage this opportunity into something more substantial. Even in the face of national recognition for my work, he couldn't simply celebrate what I had already accomplished. He needed it to lead somewhere he could understand and approve of. "Maybe you could write a book," he suggested, "or start some kind of consulting business about customer service." He was still trying to fit my success into his framework of what mattered. The most telling moment came when I asked him directly how he felt about being wrong about my career choice for all these years. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, and when he finally spoke, his voice was defensive. "I wasn't wrong, Emma. I just wanted you to have financial security and respect." But we both knew that wasn't the whole truth. He had wanted me to have his version of success, and facing the reality that there were other equally valid paths was clearly more difficult for him than I had expected. This was just the beginning of his struggle to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the person the rest of the world was celebrating. The transformation in how people treated me was so dramatic it felt like I was living in an alternate reality, where the same relatives and family friends who had pitied me were now bragging about knowing me personally. Suddenly, Uncle Tom, who had suggested I might have learning difficulties, was telling everyone at his golf club about his extraordinary niece and how he had always known there was something special about her. The hypocrisy was almost laughable, but what amazed me more was how quickly people rewrote history to make themselves look better. If you've ever watched people completely change their tune about you once you became successful, smash that subscribe button and hit like because you're going to love how this story unfolds. Have you ever had people who dismissed you suddenly want to take credit for your success? Let me know in the comments because I bet many of you have experienced this same fake support from people who weren't there when you actually needed them. My cousin Jessica, who had offered to get me a receptionist job just months earlier, now called to congratulate me and claimed she had always admired my unique path and my courage to follow my heart. She actually said, "I always told people that Emma was different, that she marched to her own drum," which was news to me since she had spent years giving me pitying looks at family gatherings. The most infuriating part was how sincere she sounded, as if she genuinely believed her revised version of our relationship was the truth. She even asked if I would be willing to speak at her company's next team-building event about finding purpose in unconventional places. The change wasn't limited to family. Customers at the diner who had barely acknowledged my existence suddenly wanted to chat, to share their own stories, to be associated with my newfound fame. Mrs. Patterson, who had been coming to Tony's for 2 years and had never once looked up from her newspaper while I served her coffee, suddenly wanted to tell me about her grandson's college applications and ask for my advice. Even some of the business executives who used to treat me like furniture were now making eye contact, saying please and thank you, and occasionally asking about my television appearance with what seemed like genuine interest. The most telling reactions came from my father's professional network, the same people who had attended that humiliating dinner party where he had mocked my career choice. Mike, his business partner, called the house to congratulate my parents on raising such a remarkable young woman, and mentioned how impressed his own daughter had been by my story. These were the same people who had laughed when my father called me just a waitress, but now they were asking him for parenting advice and wanting to know how he had instilled such compassion and wisdom in his daughter. What I found most interesting was how these people seemed to genuinely forget their previous attitudes toward me, as if their brains had automatically updated their memories to match my current status. They weren't being consciously dishonest. They had actually convinced themselves that they had always seen my potential, always respected my choices, always believed in my path. This collective amnesia showed me something important about human nature. People's opinions of you often say more about their own insecurities and limitations than they do about your actual worth. The real validation wasn't coming from these fair-weather supporters. It was coming from the strangers who had connected with my authentic self from the very beginning. The weeks following my television appearance became a masterclass in learning how to handle both praise and criticism, because not everyone was thrilled about my newfound recognition. There were people who accused me of seeking attention, others who claimed I was just doing my job and didn't deserve special recognition, and some who insisted that real heroes were doctors and firefighters, not waitresses who happened to be good listeners. The criticism stung at first, especially when it came from people in my own community who seemed offended that someone they had overlooked for years was now getting national attention. But facing these attacks head-on taught me something crucial about confidence and self-worth that I want to share with all of you. Have you ever been criticized for receiving recognition you felt you deserved? Or maybe you've been attacked for stepping outside of what people expected from you. Comment below and tell me about a time when you had to defend your worth, because these experiences shape us in powerful ways. The harshest criticism came from an unexpected source. Some of my former high school classmates who seemed genuinely angry that I was being celebrated for work they considered beneath them. On social media, I saw comments like, "I can't believe they're calling a waitress a hero when real professionals are out here working twice as hard," and "Some people will do anything for 15 minutes of fame." These attacks came mostly from people who had corporate jobs and seemed personally offended that my non-traditional path was receiving validation, while their conventional success went unnoticed by national media. What hurt more than the stranger's criticism was the subtle undermining from people I had considered friends. Sarah, a former coworker from my brief stint in an office job, made passive-aggressive comments about how some people get lucky with publicity, while others quietly do important work without needing recognition. The implication was clear. She viewed my television appearance as luck or manipulation rather than recognition for genuine impact. These responses showed me how threatened people can become when someone they've categorized as less successful suddenly receives validation they feel they deserve more. The criticism forced me to examine my own motivations and really understand why my work mattered, not just to others but to myself. Was I seeking attention? Or was I genuinely making a difference? Was my impact real? Or was I just good at making people feel sorry for me? After days of soul-searching and rereading the letters from people whose lives had been touched by our interactions, I realized that the criticism was often coming from people who had never experienced the kind of authentic human connection I facilitated daily at the diner. Learning to face criticism while maintaining confidence in my path became one of the most valuable skills I developed during this period. I stopped trying to defend myself to everyone and instead focused on the people who understood and appreciated what I was doing. The attacks actually strengthened my resolve and helped me articulate more clearly why compassionate service work deserves respect and recognition. Most importantly, I learned that criticism often reveals more about the critic's own insecurities and unfulfilled needs for recognition than it does about the person being criticized. The journey from being ashamed of my work to feeling genuinely proud of my path required me to overcome decades of internalized doubt and self-criticism that had been building since childhood. Even after the television appearance and all the positive recognition, there were still moments when I'd look in the mirror and hear my father's voice saying, "Just a waitress," or feel the familiar pang of embarrassment when people asked what I did for a living. Building real confidence meant doing the hard work of separating my own truth from the limiting beliefs others had imposed on me, and it wasn't as simple as just deciding to feel better about myself overnight. What's been the biggest challenge in believing in yourself despite what others think? Have you ever had to rebuild your confidence from the ground up after people made you doubt your worth? Share your story in the comments because I know many of you are fighting the same battle. The first step in reclaiming my confidence was recognizing how deeply I had absorbed other people's definitions of success and failure. For years, I had unconsciously agreed with my father's assessment that my work lacked value, that my choices were disappointing, that I wasn't living up to my potential. Even when customers thanked me for brightening their day, or when coworkers praised my ability to handle difficult situations, I had dismissed these compliments as politeness rather than genuine recognition. I had to learn to see my own strengths through my own eyes, rather than through the lens of people who didn't understand or value what I was doing. The television appearance became a turning point because it forced me to articulate, out loud and on camera, why my work mattered and how it had impacted people's lives. Preparing for those interviews meant collecting stories, reflecting on meaningful interactions, and really understanding the scope of influence I had been having without fully recognizing it myself. For the first time, I had to defend my choices not from a place of shame, but from a place of pride. And that shift in perspective changed everything about how I saw myself and my future. One of the most powerful moments in building my confidence came when I realized that my father's disappointment said more about his limitations than it did about my choices. His narrow definition of success had prevented him from seeing the beauty and importance of work that nourishes the human spirit, rather than just building financial security. I started to understand that his criticism came from fear that I would struggle financially, fear that others would judge our family, fear that his own sacrifices to build conventional success had been meaningless if alternative paths were equally valid. The real breakthrough happened when I stopped seeking external validation and started trusting my own internal compass about what made my life meaningful. Instead of constantly defending my choices, I began simply living them with conviction and joy. The confidence that emerged wasn't the fake it till you make it variety, but a deep, unshakable knowing that my path was not only valid, but valuable. This inner transformation would prove crucial for what was about to happen next, the moment when my father would finally have to confront his own misconceptions face to face. The confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating finally came 6 weeks after my television appearance, when my father showed up at Tony's diner during my afternoon shift without any warning. I saw him through the window, sitting in his car for several minutes before finally walking in, and I could tell from his expression that this wasn't going to be a casual visit. He looked around the diner with new eyes, taking in the warm atmosphere, the genuine smiles between customers and staff, the sense of community that I had helped build over the years. When he sat down at table 7, the same table where I had met Dorothy, the producer who changed my life, I knew this was going to be the conversation that would either heal our relationship or break it completely. If you've ever had to confront someone who underestimated you, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button because this moment was years in the making. Have you ever had someone who doubted you finally see your true worth? What was that moment like for you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments because these moments of recognition can be life-changing for everyone involved. My father ordered coffee and sat there quietly for almost an hour, watching me work, seeing how I interacted with different customers, witnessing firsthand the genuine connections I made with each person who walked through those doors. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he observed me comforting an elderly man who had lost his wife, laughing with a young mother struggling with her toddler, and efficiently managing multiple tables while making each customer feel like the most important person in the room. This wasn't the simple job he had imagined. It was complex, demanding, and required skills he had never acknowledged or appreciated. When my shift ended and I finally sat down across from him, the first words out of his mouth were an apology that caught me completely off guard. "Emma, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've been wrong about what you do here, and I've been wrong about you." He went on to explain how watching the television show and then seeing me work had opened his eyes to talents and qualities in me that he had completely overlooked. "I was so focused on what I thought success should look like that I missed seeing the success you were already creating," he admitted, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw genuine pride in his eyes when he looked at me. The conversation that followed was the most honest we had ever had, with him acknowledging how his own insecurities and rigid definitions of achievement had blinded him to the value of my work and the person I had become. He told me about the phone calls he had been receiving from friends and colleagues who were impressed by my story, and how he had started to see his dismissive comments about my career in a completely different light. "I spent so much time trying to protect you from what I thought was failure that I couldn't see you were already successful in ways I never learned how to be," he said, tears forming in his eyes. The most powerful moment came when he asked if he could start over, if there was a way for him to learn about and support the work I was actually doing, rather than the work he thought I should be doing. He wanted to understand why customers drove from other towns just to experience the atmosphere I helped create, why national television had recognized my impact, and how I had built something meaningful that he had completely missed. This wasn't just about him recognizing my career. It was about him recognizing me as a person, and that recognition would change our relationship forever. Looking back on this entire journey now, I realized that the real victory wasn't proving my father wrong or getting recognition on national television. It was learning to trust my own definition of success and impact, regardless of what anyone else thought. The girl who used to hide her uniform when walking to work had been transformed into a woman who wore it with pride, knowing that the value of what I did couldn't be measured by traditional metrics of achievement. My story isn't unique. There are millions of people out there doing meaningful work that gets dismissed or overlooked because it doesn't fit into society's narrow definitions of importance. The real lesson here is that your worth isn't determined by other people's limitations or their inability to see value in what you do. The relationship with my father didn't magically become perfect overnight, but it became honest for the first time in years. And that honesty created space for real respect and understanding to grow between us. He started coming to the diner regularly, not to check up on me, but to genuinely experience the environment I had helped create and to understand the work I was passionate about. Watching him interact with my regular customers and seeing him appreciate the connections I facilitated showed me that people can change their perspectives when they're willing to admit they might have been wrong. What surprised me most about the whole experience was how many other people's stories came to light once mine was shared publicly, people who had been hiding their own meaningful work because it didn't match societal expectations of success. I heard from teachers who felt ashamed they weren't making more money, artists who had given up their dreams for practical careers, and service workers who had internalized the message that their jobs weren't important enough to take pride in. My television appearance had given them permission to see their own work differently, and that ripple effect was more rewarding than any personal recognition I received. The most important thing I learned through this whole journey is that authenticity and compassion will always be more valuable than status and prestige, even if it takes the world a while to recognize that truth. Every person who sits at your table, walks into your store, enters your classroom, or calls your customer service line is a human being with a story, struggles, and a need to feel seen and valued. When you approach your work, any work, with genuine care for the people you serve, you're doing something sacred, regardless of how others perceive the importance of your job title. Today, I still work at Tony's Diner, not because I'm stuck there or lack better options, but because I've created something beautiful and meaningful that I'm not willing to walk away from for the sake of impressing people who measure worth by all the wrong standards. My father now introduces me to his friends as his daughter who makes a real difference in people's lives. And while his approval feels good, it's no longer something I need to feel complete. The real success has been learning to see myself clearly, to value my own contributions, and to understand that impact comes in many forms, most of them much more important than the ones our society celebrates most loudly. The greatest victory of all has been discovering that the person I am, with all my choices, my path, my way of connecting with others, was always enough, always valuable, always worthy of respect. It just took the rest of the world a little while to catch up to what I was learning to see in myself, and sometimes that's exactly how the best stories unfold. Your worth was never in question. Sometimes it just takes others longer to recognize what was always there, waiting to be acknowledged and celebrated. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated or dismissed because of your job, your choices, or your dreams, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button and smash the like button, because there are so many more stories like this that need to be told. Stories of people who found success and meaning in places others never thought to look. Your support helps me share these messages with people who desperately need to hear them, people who are sitting in their cars right now wondering if they're wasting their lives because someone told them their dreams weren't good enough. Together, we can change the narrative about what success really looks like and help others see their own worth before the world catches up. I know that many of you watching this have your own stories of being underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel small by people who should have supported you. Maybe you're a teacher who gets tired of people saying, "Those who can't do, teach," or a nurse who's sick of being treated like you're just following doctor's orders, or a retail worker who deals with customers who act like you're invisible. Maybe you're an artist, a caregiver, a social worker, or someone in any number of professions that society undervalues despite their crucial importance to our communities and our humanity. Your story matters, and your work has value that extends far beyond what shows up on a paycheck or a business card. The connections you make, the people you help, the problems you solve, the comfort you provide, these contributions are building a better world, one interaction at a time, even when no one seems to notice or appreciate what you're doing. Don't let anyone convince you that meaningful work is only found in corner offices, or that impact can only be measured in dollars and prestige. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me about a time when someone underestimated you, or share how you found meaning and purpose in work that others don't understand or appreciate. Let's create a community here where people can celebrate authentic success, where we recognize that the most important work often happens in the spaces between what society considers important. Your experiences and insights help other people feel less alone in their struggles and more confident in their own unconventional paths. Remember, you don't need anyone else's permission to find your work meaningful, and you don't need external validation to know that you're making a difference. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply continue being authentically yourself, doing work that aligns with your values, and treating every person you encounter with genuine respect and kindness. The world needs more people like that, people like you, and I hope my story has reminded you that your path is valid, your choices matter, and your impact is real whether anyone acknowledges it or not. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. Success isn't about impressing people at dinner parties or having a job title that makes your parents proud at family gatherings. Real success is about living authentically, making genuine connections, and contributing something positive to the world around you, no matter how small those contributions might seem to others. My father's recognition was nice, but it wasn't what made my work valuable. My work was always valuable, and it took me learning to see that for myself before anyone else could see it too. If you're in a place right now where people are questioning your choices, dismissing your dreams, or making you feel like you're not living up to your potential, I want you to remember Emma's story. Remember that sometimes the people who love us most have the hardest time seeing our true worth because they're looking through the lens of their own fears and limitations. Your value doesn't depend on their ability to recognize it, and your path doesn't need their approval to be the right one for you. The next time someone calls you just anything, just a teacher, just a server, just an artist, just a stay-at-home parent, I want you to remember that there's no such thing as just when you're talking about work that involves caring for others, creating beauty, solving problems, or making the world a little bit better than you found it. These roles are not consolation prizes or stepping stones to something better. They are the foundation of a compassionate, functioning society. Thank you for joining me on this journey, for listening to my story, and for being part of a community that values authentic success over artificial status. If this video helped you see your own worth a little more clearly, or if it gave you the courage to keep following your own path despite what others think, then sharing my story was worth every vulnerable moment. Make sure you're subscribed for more stories about people who found their own definitions of success, who chose authenticity over approval, and who proved that the most meaningful victories often come from the most unexpected places. Until next time, keep being exactly who you are. The world needs more people willing to do that, and your story matters more than you know.